Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to ParaTruth.
What's going on, ParaTruthers? Welcome to a brand new ParaTruth Reborn. This is a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. My name is Justin.
And I'm Erik.
And tonight we're bringing on Richard Estep to talk about his book, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm. We've had Richard on numerous times with ParaTruth Radio, and we're happy to bring him back. Richard has been a paranormal investigator for 30 years and is the author of more than 30 books. He is a cast member of the TV shows Haunted Hospitals, Paranormal Revenge, and Paranormal 911. He writes a regular column for Haunted Magazine and frequently presents at events across the U.S., and we're going to bring in Richard Estep. Richard, welcome to ParaTruth Reborn. How's it going?
Hey, gentlemen, it's going well, thanks. How about yourself?
Doing good. So you've been on our show, ParaTruth Radio, at least quite a bit. But for our new listeners, tell everybody a little bit about how you got into the paranormal field and why you wanted to do a book on Fox Hollow Farm.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a haunted house. Loved the books of people like Peter Underwood, Guy Lyon Playfair, some of the greats, I think, in the paranormal field. Harry Price, who was a great showman and questionable virtue, but still great popularizer of the field. That gave me a love of writing. We all, as writers, write the books we want to read. And so I ended up writing those kind of books and still do. Fox Hollow Farm, I mean, the opportunity to, number one, who would say no to the chance to move in to a residence haunted supposedly by the ghost of a serial killer? But more importantly, I think it sticks in my craw, and it has until very recently when the Hulu show came out, that this case was forgotten. That these gentlemen, their bones are sitting in evidence boxes on a shelf somewhere with no burial, no memorial until very recently, you know. And I felt that nobody was really making any effort to keep the story alive. It had been covered on an episode of Ghost Adventures, I think. There had been a documentary movie made about it by a guy called Dan Hall, who I think did a good job, but that was pretty much it. And I think that this was a story that has a lot to say, not just about the paranormal, but about the appalling way in which we as a society treat some of our marginalized men and women.
For sure. Now, what do we know for sure about Herb and his crimes, and what remains speculation still to this day?
Well, if we're going to be technical, the word alleged and should be before serial killer whenever we talk about Herb Baumeister. And indeed, I saw a newspaper article from this week that they were talking about the identification of another of his victims through DNA evidence, and it listed Baumeister as an alleged serial killer because he is. He was never charged, let alone convicted. So I think that literally everything about this case remains speculation if you get down to brass tacks. But there is no other pulp. Well, let me backtrack on that. There is speculation that Herb may have worked in concert with at least one other accomplice, potentially more. I think that's entirely possible. And then you enter the debate of, well, who was dominant, who was not. We do know for sure that the remains of multiple men were found on Herb's property, that Herb Baumeister matched the description of a man named Brian Smart, who was seen in the nightclubs, the gay nightclubs of Indianapolis, taking home a number of the victims. He was the last person that they were ever seen alive with, and they turned up dead in his backyard. So he's a very strong candidate to be the perpetrator in this case. But, again, there was never a trial because Herb Baumeister took his own life before he could be put on trial, which, again, is, something that an innocent individual probably would not have done under these circumstances.
Right.
Okay. So it kind of has a Jeffrey Dahmer feel to it. Now, do they know if Herb was gay himself?
And it's interesting you make that comparison because I think it's the TV show makes the statement, this is the Dahmer you've never heard of. And yes, Herb undoubtedly was gay himself. He had a gay lover. His MO was that he would go to these nightclubs when his wife and kids were away, usually staying at the lake house on Lake Wawasee. He would meet men and say that his name was Brian Smart. He adopted this alias. And his story was, or so we're told anyway, that he would approach men that he liked the look of, preferably ones that were a little down on their luck or, had been ostracized, maybe couch surfing, maybe, no fixed abode. But he would tell them that he was a contractor working on a house with a swimming pool in the basement, that the house was empty for the weekend, and that he had some alcohol there, he had some drugs, and that they could go back and party in this house with a pool, which sounds like a pretty great way to spend your Friday or Saturday night. I mean, not to me now, I'm 51, a great way to spend a Friday night for me now is a cup of tea and a good book. Yeah. But it was a very attractive offer for some of these men. And so they accompanied him back. And of course, he'd set things up before he left. Herb's, the victim, or supposedly the victim that got away, Mark Goodyear, says that Herb's MO was that he would take the swimming pool and he would crank the heat all the way up before he left the house. Then he would roll the cover over so that I always picture this as like a saucepan simmering on the range, just kind of getting the heat up there. And then when he would bring these men into the pool, he would open the 3 sets of French doors, which lead out to the back patio. Cold air would come in, roll back the pool cover. Cold air meets warm air, and what do you get? Steam. And so you've got this steamy, disorienting environment. To make things even more surreal, the pool is ringed with mannequins. And these mannequins all have names and backstories, and they are wearing a variety of clothing, some of them belonging to former victims, in fact. And in the pool, they would engage in autoerotic asphyxiation. Herb would invite them to strangle him while they engaged in, sexual conduct. And then he would return the favor, but he would not stop. And that was Herb Baumeister's MO for killing his victims.
Wow. Now, regarding the farm itself, like what kind of paranormal activity are we speaking of? Like, how active is it?
Less so today than it was. So the house, it's really kind of necessary to talk about how the house changed hands. So Herb Baumeister, when he heard that the police were looking for him, drove to the Canadian border, crossed the border, found a scenic spot in a national park, ate his favorite food, a PB&J sandwich, and then shot himself in the head. Although there is now some speculation, perhaps, that he was possibly killed by an accomplice. That is debatable. Either way, we know that he died of a single gunshot wound to the head, which the official account says was self-inflicted. At that point, the police descend on Fox Hollow Farm. They discover thousands of bone fragments, ranging in size from entire femurs to forearms with handcuffs still on them, to small chips and fragments, because the critters, the animals that live in that vicinity, have taken these remains and they've scattered them far and wide. So Herb's wife and kids move out. They go to start a new life. and who can blame them for that, for wanting to be free of that appalling legacy. Fox Hollow Farm sat vacant for a few years until it was bought by a couple called Rob and Vicky Graves, who moved in with their children. And so Rob, who co-authored the book with me, is, it's fair to say, an expert on the Baumeister murders. And he has a definite tie with that location, in that, you know, he bathes in Herb Baumeister's bathtub. He has Herb Baumeister's library. You know, he's the closest to an expert I think we have on Baumeister's life. And Rob did not believe in ghosts. His wife, Vicky, was a little less skeptical, but so strange things started happening around the house when they moved in. Stuff that seemed weird, but you might try and explain away. For example, Vicky was vacuuming downstairs and the power cord from the vacuum cleaner was pulled out of the wall. You know, we've all done it, right? We've been vacuuming, we've caught the cable, we pull it out, and it kind of whiplashes around your legs. And that's just us being clumsy. Well, Vicky insisted that it was jerked out of the wall. Okay, maybe not. What she couldn't deny, though, was the day she came home and she saw a young man in a red shirt walking through the trees to one side of her house. And initially she thought it was a trespasser. So she was getting ready to fetch Rob to go see this guy off. And when she paid closer attention, got a good look at the man, she realized that he had no legs. That this was essentially an apparition that was legless from the thighs on down. That's what finally convinced her, the appearance of this apparition, that this farm was haunted. This house was haunted.
Now, do the spirits seem to want justice, peace, or simply to be acknowledged? Did you get a lot of experiences there from any of that?
It's complex, and I'm always very skeptical when it comes to assigning identities in cases of paranormal activity. I did bring in different mediums who gave me different accounts, different explanations. So that was kind of intriguing to me. The thing that I feared the most was, and of course, you know, you follow the trail wherever it leads. Mm-hmm. But the thing I feared the most was the idea that some of his victims may still be earthbound, may still be trapped there, because as if they had not suffered enough at the hands of this monster in life, you know? Mm-hmm. But there were others that say that they've seen the apparition of Herb Baumeister himself looking out of the kitchen window. One medium told me, entirely credit, you know, he told me that he was convinced that there was an entity in the pool. He called it the frog, and that it was a non-human entity that had been drawn there because of the evil energies that the murders had created, you know, like a moth to a flame. So I can't speak to the validity of any of those. Those are all kind of subjective. And whenever you work with mediums, you run into that issue, right? Mm-hmm. You run into the whole, like, I always think that whether you're dealing with a Ouija board or whether you're dealing with a medium, it's kind of like those old internet chat rooms from the 90s. You only have the word of the person that they are who they say. Right. You know, it's not like they're literally turning up and manifesting. So I tried to keep an open mind, and I do to this day. So the accurate answer is I am not sure, but something is active in that house. Something that growled while I was swimming in the pool, something that whispered the name Laura while I was swimming in the pool, Laura happening to be my wife's name, something that stroked my tricep when I was in the pump room, something that said in a very kind of wheezy voice when I was out in the woods at one of the body disposal sites, get away from there. I do not know.
Well, I mean, it's wild to just think about, like, not just the potential spirits of the deceased themselves, but possibly dark entities that are there prowling the grounds as well. And, you know, we know through a number of different investigative circumstances, whenever there is a traumatic experience and these darker entities show up, they kind of have a hold on the whole ground, almost as if it's imprisoning other spirits in many cases, which is always, you know, kind of horrifying, really, but also really intriguing. Now, regarding the pool itself, like, do you find, or have you found that the events, the hauntings, that is, really seem to reside around the pool specifically, or how does the haunting spread out from the home and maybe elsewhere around the yard or the vicinity?
It's a large estate, so about 18 acres, although it's half that today because they sold off some of the land. But I think that ground zero for the haunting was the pool and the basement, which is where murders took place, either in the pool or the wet bar, which adjoins the pool, is adjacent to the pool. So that makes a whole lot of sense, but also activity does happen upstairs. There is an annex built on the side of the house. They call them in-law complexes. The idea being that you can move mom-in-law or, your grandparents or whoever into one of those places if they have to move in with you. So that was occupied by a guy called Joe LeBlanc, who worked with Rob Graves at the car dealership and was looking for a place to live. And Rob, let him sublet a room out to him. And what's interesting to me is that, Joe came along and kindly offered to be a part of our investigation. Joe is, I think, a catalyst because he is a young single man at the time who was about the same age as many of Baumeister's victims. And it was when Joe took up residence at Fox Hollow that a lot of the paranormal activity ramped up, that it went into high gear. You're introducing this individual into the mix. And I don't think that's a coincidence. That's when, Joe would have these terrible nightmares. He would dream that something was chasing him and he was running for his life. And I get it. If I lived at Fox Hollow Farm knowing its history, I think I would have a few nightmares myself. I'm not saying that's necessarily supernatural, but how this ties in is that one night Joe was walking his dog along the driveway. Driveway is extremely long. It's very dark. We're looking at a very kind of rural, kind of scene. And all of a sudden his dog catches smell of something or sight of something or hears something, whatever, goes darting off into the trees. So Joe goes after it because he doesn't want to lose his dog, and who knows what it is, right? Maybe it's a raccoon or a fox or whatever. It's pitch black. He can't see. And Joe enters the trees, and there, as he turns around one of the trees, he sees a young man staring at him, and it's the man that he's seen in his dreams in his apartment. And this is a young man in a red shirt. The same young man that Vicky Graves saw walking through those same trees shortly before. And when they compared notes, they both agreed that, yes, this is the same man. And it was, they used the photograph of Baumeister's victims to relate this man to being one of Herb Baumeister's victims.
Wow. Did he know about that victim prior to witnessing him? Let me rephrase that. Did he know that she had witnessed this particular form before he himself?
She knew that he knew that she had seen an apparition, I believe. But the key thing is, it was only when both of them happened to look at pictures of Baumeister's victims that together they hit on, that's him at the same time.
Nope.
That's the man we both saw. And it was a very kind of shocking moment for them. You have two independent eyewitnesses seeing the same apparition in the same area.
Right.
There's a lot of cases like this where true crime and the paranormal kind of intersect. How does that, in your opinion, happen, where we have these two different genres, if you will, intersecting?
I think that true crime holds a real fascination for a certain type of person, and it's a similar mindset to the kind of person that's interested in the paranormal. I mean, not always. There are purists that I'm all about the crime, the murders, those kind of things, but I also think that the unknowns, the elements of mystery, the darker aspects of this do kind of cross-pollinate. As far as I'm concerned, when I write a book or I'm working on a project like this, number one, telling the human story is the most important thing to me. And when I write books about true crime that have no paranormal content at all, I'm primarily interested in two things. Number one is keeping a light on the victims and not the murderers. And number two, I think we all would like to know how these individuals think so that we might better understand them and hopefully better avoid them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think it is then that locations like this continue to attract attention and in particular investigators to want to investigate these places? Because I personally know like a couple of spots in which there were murders that were caused. Nobody had specified that there was a haunting, and yet we see flocks of people running there to try to investigate and see what they can find. What is it about these places you think that's so intriguing to humanity?
I hate to say it, but I think there is a macabre and morbid aspect to it. Nobody investigates at Fox Hollow Farm anymore. The Graves family really don't allow it, and I completely respect that. I think that, I hate to say it, but there's a fascination and also there's a certain degree of egotism to it. You know, the idea that people think they're the ones that can crack this case and so on and so forth. When in reality, I think these cases are rare. You look at Gacy's home, you look at Dahmer's apartment building, you know, they are demolished, and they're demolished with good reason. Nobody wants them to become a shrine to these monsters. Fox Hollow, I know that the municipality, the local area, was gonna band together, get some money, kick it in, and then, you know, bulldoze the place, just demolish it flat. And I 100% understand that. They don't want it to be this ever-present scar on their community. You know, they don't want to be the town that's known for that. And they don't want this constant stream of trespassers, which Rob and Vicky did deal with for the longest time, and dealt with again once the TV show started airing in February, you know, to the point where the police had to mount a guard on Fox Hollow Farm last month. On the other hand, I think that, you know, it is a good thing that this place is still standing, because the Graves family has reclaimed that house from its awful history. Rather than just wiping it out, it stands as an education to us, and it's also a living family home. So there have been how many Christmases, how many 4th of Julys, how many Thanksgivings, where families get together in that house and they bring light and they bring warmth and they bring good vibes. I rather like the idea that the evil, the negativity of what's gone on there can maybe be washed out if you go at it long enough. And I think that's partly why the activity at Fox Hollow Farm is subsiding.
Okay.
Well, I hate to bring this up because we talk about it way too much on our show, but, you know, Jeffrey Dahmer's home in Bath, Ohio, we got to do an investigation there just because there was reports of paranormal activity. And now they've shot the one movie there and have done a couple documentaries. So I appreciate that you bring up that, you know, a lot of these places are bulldozed just so that scar's not there anymore. And I think with the Bath, Ohio house specifically, it's still standing and leaving a scar because people keep coming in and out of there.
Now, I thought Dahmer lived in an apartment complex. What am I missing?
So the house that we're talking about was the house that he grew up in, and it's where he originally where he killed Stephen Hicks. So his first official murder.
Right.
So that house does still stand. And
is it a private residence now?
It is a private residence now, yes.
Yeah.
And did you get evidence there?
We did, yeah, a little bit. Not a lot. I mean, you know, doing paranormal investigations, a lot of times you're not getting much. But there was a floating torso there. Erik saw with his eyes a gold orb fly through walls. Erik had his name whispered. So I think that there is something there. What it is, I don't know. But
well, and there's something I would love to float at you guys as well. One thing that I've learned after doing this now for 30 years is that we make a lot of assumptions. And one is that sometimes what we get isn't what we assume we're getting. So I always think we have to consider paranormal activity as kind of like sometimes an infection or a contamination. So maybe that's because I work in the medical field. But my point is that sometimes I think we go to investigate a location, we expect a certain thing based on its history or its background. Maybe what we're getting is something that we're bringing in there with us, like in the same way we would track mud in if we didn't wipe our feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
I used to do ghost tours at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, inspiration for The Shining. And the most common, by far one of the most common reports from the Stanley was ghostly children, apparitions, footsteps running, kids laughing, playing, giggling, those kind of things. Well, the hotel's historian checked again, and there is not one kid on record ever as having died in that hotel. Not one. So what's going on? Well, number one, I think you have the possibility that it's residual, that kids that were there have left some kind of imprint because they were so very happy at the Stanley during their days. Number two is that something's imitating children. And number three is hitchhikers. The idea that, some of the activity is caused by the many paranormal enthusiasts like ourselves that go to these places. Who knows what psychic mud we're tracking in onto the carpet and leaving behind us when we go. So I do wonder if some of these places, you have to look at, did I bring this along with me and not know it?
Right. Well, and on top of that, unless this is like these children in particular were captured on evidence in some way, if people are just witnessing them, it could very well just be psychological too. They're manifesting it in their own mind and eyes, and it's not really there to begin with.
You mentioned that, and it fascinates me. Rob and Vicky have a dog sitter of all things, and when they go on vacation, and house sits too. Their house sitter is there, and let me tell you, to be all alone in that place, it's very dark around Fox Hollow. You go out there at night, and it is like pitch black, surrounded by trees, long driveway leading to the road, and so I'm like, I don't know how comfortable I would be being here on my own in the dark for a week. but if you didn't tell me the history of that house, if you said, hey, Richard, listen, there is this beautiful mock Tudor mansion in Indiana. We'd love you to house sit for a week. It's great. You can hang out. They've got cable. You can write your books. You can watch TV. I'll pay you $1,000. I'd be like, show me the way, It's only when we factor in what we know that our imagination, I think, starts playing tricks on us. And so I think that sometimes our own predispositions and biases are our worst enemy as paranormal investigators. What I wish I had done, and I would love to do it someday, but that ship may already have sailed. I would love to take someone who has no idea what happened in that house whatsoever and put them in there for a weekend with cameras and just record what happens, without any notion of bias at all. I think that would be a very valuable experiment.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I'm glad you brought up the bringing it into at a location, because when we left, I felt like something wasn't right, and I just said, whatever's here right now, you need to leave. And I heard it like in a really deep voice, "Goodbye, Justin." Mm-hmm. But I'd also been touched there, so it makes a lot of sense that I might have brought something with me, just thinking that I would be catching something there because of what happened there.
Well, and Goodbye, Justin's interesting, right? The idea that you've had this hitchhiker you didn't know about, and here's a new playground for it all of a sudden. And you know what? Okay, thanks. Bye. Peace out. It's been fun knowing you. Let's keep in touch. And you go, so I think that probably happens more often. And then I get to thinking, people like us, and almost certainly, your viewers and listeners to your show, we're of a similar mindset, right? Most people spend their weekends watching the Denver Broncos or whoever their team is. We spend weekends in these dark and haunted places trying to talk to the dead. We are a certain type of person, and we go to the same types of places. So, for example, if I go to Waverly Hills this weekend and then you go next weekend, who's to say I don't take something along with me that I picked up at Bobby Mackey's back when it was standing, and I took it from A to B, and then just like cross-contamination, you go to Waverly Hills the next weekend, it glums onto you, and it comes to your next haunted location. I think maybe there's something to this idea that we can contaminate and infect haunted locations just by the amount of them that we go to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So, the way you make it sound is as if in many spiritual ways, these entities could be parasites that just latch on and jump from one place to the next. And they're so, and I know for the longest time, people early on, at least in the whole investigative realm that is ghost hunting or investigating, people used to believe that spirits would basically be stuck in a single place. They wouldn't be able to leave the four walls that they were stuck in. And that has, I think, I can't say it's been officially disproved, but I think there's plenty of hard evidence that shows that, just as you say, these entities can move from one place to another, especially if they can attach themselves to us in some way and keep that energy and move about.
Oh, let's hope so. Because firstly, I try not to default to ghosts equal the dead, right? I think that's lazy thinking. It's born of many, many generations of scary movies and literature and things like that. I think that in some cases, it seems undeniable that we are communicating with either the dead or fragments of a former intelligence or whatever you want to call it. But if my afterlife has me confined to the same four walls, that sounds appalling.
Right.
I'd like to get out and see the world, I'd like to get out and travel. So I hope it's that way. I really, really do. That being said, I also like the idea that we can set and enforce boundaries. You have a lock on your front door. I'm assuming you have a Ring doorbell or security system or something like that. So just because strangers can travel, they can get on a plane in Cincinnati and get off the plane in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Doesn't mean they can just walk into your house, right? Well, we set those same, I think, security expectations and boundaries when we investigate. I'm very clear about it when I do. I didn't used to be. I was quite lazy about it, and I used to scoff at the idea. And then I had to have my house blessed by a Catholic priest, which is a big deal when you're an agnostic. You've never eaten humble pie like it until you've had to call your friend the Catholic priest. You say, "Hey, you come bless my house." So I think there's something to it. I do think the potential exists that they can travel, and I think sometimes we unwittingly help them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Now, if the walls of Fox Hollow Farm could talk, what would they say?
They would say, "This is private property. Keep out." That's the question, though, isn't it? I think that house is, if these walls could talk, never has that been more true than in this case. There is so much doubt. There is so much obfuscation and confusion and conflicting stories about what happened during those murders. I would be most interested to hear, the truth of what happened, how many individuals were truly involved in carrying out the crimes. Did Herb Baumeister act alone? Did he have an accomplice? Was he an accomplice? I hope those walls would also say that as dark as things once were in their house, they are getting lighter and lighter with every passing year.
Mm-hmm. But it is taken time for that darkness to fade away. Mm-hmm. So why do you think some places hold on to darkness so long after these crimes are over?
Well, let's pick other locations where you have a tragic event takes place and then they just are left to sit and fester. Mm-hmm. You don't have any energy going in or out, so I don't know that you have an active haunting. That is fascinating, right? The idea of, is a place still haunted if there is no witness there to observe it or experience it? Right. That's one of the great, questions, I think, for our field to answer. But without any kind of energy source coming in, I don't know that that much goes on. And then you introduce the human equation, right? And I think with some of these darker locations, I think they lie dormant. And it takes that reintroduction of human energy in order to make them simmer up again. And at that point, if the energy was dark to begin with, why would we expect it to have mellowed when it has basically been laying fallow?
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, there's multiple locations like this, and even in locations that haven't had this much trauma there. But if somebody wants to do an investigation at some place like this, what is the best advice you can give them?
Firstly, always get permission. Don't trespass. It should go without saying, but it's amazing how many people think the rules don't apply to them. So assuming that you have permission to do so, number one, be respectful. No matter who or what you're dealing with, it is foolish to go in and swagger. And I've been guilty of this in the past myself a little bit. I generally don't provoke. I do make exceptions in cases like I might be dealing with, Herb Baumeister, or I investigated the Gacy haunting. I'll make an exception in those kind of cases. But unless you are very sure of who or what you're dealing with, tread softly. Listen twice as much as you speak. Try and establish a connection. Keep an open mind, but not so open that people will throw any old rubbish into it.
Mm. Now, my final question here regarding Fox Hollow Farm. Considering the crime that happened there, is it possible that the land itself is just cursed? Or is it strictly that, people bring the evil with them because they're interested in knowing these things? Like you said earlier today, sometimes we go into these places with a mindset that kind of might set the whole mood for the night. But I think there's been a lot of question as to whether or not it's actually the circumstance behind the haunting, or if it's the land itself, considering how old it may be and how many generations have lived there over the years.
I think you always have to consider the land. As a paranormal investigator, I've seen new houses, completely new constructions that come with ghosts. And so you always do have to consider the land. I think, though, if you don't look at the events here closely, how unlucky would it be that this land just happened to be cursed and just happened to be the home of a serial murderer, and there is a lot of coincidence there. And I'm a big fan of Occam's razor. I don't know if you chaps are familiar with the concept.
We are, yes.
Okay, and I don't want to assume, and I don't want to mansplain. So would one of you, explain that concept to the ear space?
Erik, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's razors more or less. If I'm unless I'm mistaken, it's more or less what is could be and what isn't. Like, we walk into a place, we can't assume just anything. Some of these places may exist with evils that have always been there, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true either.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of Occam's razor is that, given two competing explanations, generally the least complex tends to be true.
The simplest is the ready. Yeah.
And so and it does kind of relate to what you're saying, Erik, because is it likely, on the one hand, if we assume that Fox Hollow Farm is haunted, on the one hand, is it because the ground was cursed and somehow a serial murderer happened to move in and buy that place, happened to murder people there? Or did bad things happen in this place, which we know, and that was the precipitating, the fuse which lit the conflagration, as it were? To me, the second explanation, bad things caused worse things, is simpler and fits better than jumping through the hoops of the land is cursed and so on and so forth. I know that this is the US, right? And this whole country is a native burial ground. It just is. And now, thanks to Steven Spielberg and Poltergeist and Tobe Hooper, we all know it, right? It's become a cliche. It's become a trope. I mean, I just saw this very argument made on Ghost Adventures last week for the Poltergeist house, the one where they shot exterior scenes primarily from the movie, being haunted or cursed because this was native ground and, skeletons were put in the ground for a movie shoot. I mean, is it possible? Sure, but you can't throw a rock in this country without hitting, old burial grounds. Or people always say to me, or frequently say to me, and it kind of makes me laugh. Richard, you're from England, right? You're from Europe, where all the history is. And I know what they mean. Because, it's not we've got more. There were people here too. Right. That's what happening here too. Massacres and stuff was happening here too. Yeah, sure. There weren't knights riding around in suits of armor and that. I get it.
Right.
But by the same token, old land is old land, and all land, I think, has its history. You have to look at the ground, sure. But in the case of Fox Hollow Farm, my suspicion is a bad man did some horrific things, and that sparked this haunting off.
Well, what I think is really interesting too, when it comes to cursed grounds, so many people want to blame it on the grounds itself. But it's very possible if the grounds are cursed, it's actually could, or at least it could be a manifestation of so many people believing in that possibility to begin with. that then re-energizes it and creates this cursed ground.
Yeah. And you kind of hit upon something that's I've always wondered about with curses, having written about them in a couple of books now. Do curses work if you don't believe in them? If you were to be cursed by someone and you didn't know that you'd been cursed, would you in fact feel the effects of the curse? I always think of a curse as a kind of reverse placebo effect,
Mm-hmm.
We know that in medicine, placebo works. I mean, you can't argue that. Peer-reviewed study after peer-reviewed study proves that it does. We don't know why, but we do know that belief is a powerful force,
Mm-hmm.
The question is, does it work when you don't know about it? And by the same token, in cases where we talk about curses, this collective belief, this collected agreement that a place can be cursed, a place is cursed. The same is true of hauntings, I think. A place is haunted. We can kind of all agree on it. I think that can sometimes usher these things into life, or if there is kind of a spark there already, propel them to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Belief is immensely powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it on our show, but the belief of tulpas and that you can create stuff just by random thought.
Egregores, tulpas, thought forms, right?
Yeah.
Which, part of Himalayan culture, I know, but I've seen a number of cases in which I am convinced that the entity in question was an egregore, that it was created, that it was manufactured. I mean, the one that I talk about frequently is Malvern Manor in Iowa, one of my favorite haunted locations, which is haunted by the ghost of a little girl called Inez, who we know hanged herself or was either accidentally hanged or hanged herself. There is some debate in, I want to say 1900, and has haunted the place ever since. And that story was told over and over at Malvern Manor. Investigators frequently encounter the spirit of a little girl that sounds, looks, acts like a little girl, answers to Inez, except it was subsequently discovered on deeper research that although Inez was real and she did die that way, she actually died at her home, not at Malvern Manor, which was several blocks away. But by the time that became knowledge, the story had taken root. It was entrenched. And so why would the ghost of this little girl haunt a building she'd probably never been to blocks from where she died and lived?
Right.
Or do we have an opportunistic entity that's role-playing?
Right.
Or has a thought form, whatever you want to call it, egregore, tulpa, whatever, being created because that story was told over and over with conviction. Nobody was trying to mislead anybody. That was, the story as it was understood, and it was repeated. And this is you talk about curses. The curse of the paranormal writer is the phrase, "it is said." Right? It is said, little guy. And then all of a sudden it becomes established fact. And then all of a sudden you're recording EVPs from that established fact when it isn't a fact at all. How do you explain it?
Right.
You're right. And it's crazy to think that, who knows, many of the haunted locations that we've all investigated over the years may not even really be haunted if people didn't believe in those things to begin with, right?
Or
in the stories.
I mean, yeah, but also how do we define haunted, right? That's a great question, isn't it?
Yeah, that is.
We come back to this really narrow definition of ghosts equal dead people. You get footsteps in the night, walking across your floorboards in a house that somebody died in 50 years ago. Chances are that's residual. It doesn't mean you actually have this discarnate intelligence necessarily in your home. Not that that's much of a comfort to you at 3 a.m. when it happens and you go looking for the nearest paranormal team. But it's a haunting, right? Even though it's not intelligent, it's still a haunting. And I think that the word haunting is an umbrella for us. The word ghost is an umbrella, and we don't define it particularly well. And I always think back to the SPR's landmark study on phantasms of the living, how they looked at all these cases of apparitions where the people were alive and perfectly well at the time. And this was huge. This just turned out to be immensely common. Were they ghosts? I mean, what else would we call them? Were they astrally projecting or traveling? They weren't dead. We know that. So there goes our ghosts equals dead people. And then what are we left with? So I think we have a problem of definition in the paranormal field, and we kind of ignore it because it's so much more fun for us to just go creep around in the dark.
assuming that we're talking to the dead. Right.
Yeah, for real. It's funny you bring that up because two instances came to my mind. My wife and I were sleeping the one night here in our house. As far as we know, nobody died here, but we heard footsteps upstairs, and lo and behold, it was our dog. But he never goes upstairs when we're sleeping, so it freaked her out. It freaked me
Hearing
out.
footsteps and then this disembodied panting.
And then another time I was doing an investigation for a friend's business, and a name came up on the ghost box that I have. And everybody's like, oh, that guy actually used to live here. He actually just lives right down the street now. So it's like, okay, was there something there that knew that name? It wasn't saying it's him. It was just bringing that name up because he used to live there, or, whatever.
Yeah, I think we just have to keep an open mind, we need to cast a broader net sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it is about that time to let you go, so I want to give you a chance to tell everybody where they can find you, find the book. The mic's all yours.
Yeah, guys, you can find Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm at all of your traditional outlets, not just Amazon and the big companies, but also your small, local, independently owned bookstore can order it in for you as well. So I encourage you to do that. And you can find the TV series, which it partially inspired, The Fox Hollow Murders, is now streaming on Hulu.
Awesome. All right, Richard, we will let you go. Have a good rest of your evening. And then, as soon as we have a link, we'll get it to you.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot. Sorry that we had that misconnect. I still don't know what happened with that, but
Yeah.
Well,
Take
but we will talk to you later.
care. Be safe. Have fun. Thanks a
All
lot.
right.
Thank you. Goodbye.
All right, folks. That was Richard Estep, author of The Horrors at Fox Hollow Farm. He's got so many other books, so make sure you check him out. And I'm sure we will have him back on at some point for one of his other books for sure. Some final thoughts I think we need to kind of get out of our heads just so we can clear the air and not have hauntings in our place of home. What are some of your final thoughts about like investigate or hauntings like this and having to do with murders or serial killers since we've had the experience?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a tough call, like when we did the investigation at Dahmer's house, and I know our listeners have heard this like 3 days in or a week in a row now. But a lot of what we captured didn't give us significant evidence pointing to Dahmer or Stephen
One
Hicks
thing or another,
anything
yeah.
else for that matter. We saw a nail in a tree that, based on the math and the growth of a tree, very well might have been put there by Dahmer himself when he was nailing animals on the tree. The disembodied apparition that was seen, that very well could have just been a manifestation, a mistake by the eyes, a trick of the eyes. We don't really know for sure. As for like the glowing orb that I saw, again, was it even really there? Wasn't it? And if it was, who was it? What was it? The only thing that, like for me personally, that I know for a fact is the EVP that I caught, which was responding by saying my name in a very creepy way. Where did that come from and who said it? Right? Like, was it Dahmer? Was it Hicks? Was it some other entity that maybe we brought along or that was manifested there by somebody else at some point? We don't really know. I can only imagine the type of things that maybe the current owners are witnessing, considering how much publicity that house has received over the last 10 years, considering there's been filming done in there. And trust me, as someone who works in the film industry, there is a lot of energy that was placed into that house during those 3 months or so that they filmed. So, it's incredibly interesting. And then going to, I was going to bring this up earlier, but like the idea of cursed land, one story that really pops up in my mind is the story of the Amityville house, right?
Yeah.
Because there was a belief that this house was already cursed to begin with or haunted, and that the murders had happened because he was kind of broken. He was worn down and broken and eventually more or less possessed, or at least oppressed to the point of actually going around and killing the family. Again, like, is that really what happened? Was this person just a psychopath? Did the story even, like, what exactly happened?
Yeah.
We can go around circles trying to figure it out. But I think in the end, it's just, currently at least, it's up to each person's, I guess mostly just like what their truth is, right? What they want to believe. Like, we can only do so much. I mean, I'll tell you that there are things I see on Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters on the other shows that I'm like, I don't believe it. I don't think that was, no, and of course, if I was there, it might be a very different story. But, we have to take things with a grain of salt, but we also have to take real consideration when it comes to these hauntings, because we don't want to mislead individuals, especially as investigators who are trying to help others. The very last thing we want to do is mislead someone, because that could make things worse, or it could completely dismiss the situation entirely, and they're just back to square one.
Well, we've talked about it numerous times, not just with the Jeffrey Dahmer case, but a couple of cases that we worked on where a certain individual was giving information, and you can't be doing that when you're on the investigation itself.
Right.
But you also cannot give definitive one way or the other, yes, your place is haunted. You can present the evidence, let them believe whatever it is they're going to believe, because they're going to believe that, even if you tell them there's nothing there.
Yeah, but I think in our experience, we've had people ask us what our opinions are, and
right,
you have to give an opinion. I mean, if you want to be, if you don't want to be a jerk about it, you give them your opinion and what you think. But so one thing that I've noticed a lot with the investigators we've worked with, and even those that we see on TV, they will say, like, I think this house is haunted, and they go give some sort of explanation as to how things can be better or why they don't have to worry about stuff. I have heard stories of investigators going into homes and saying, yes, I believe it's haunted, and then giving this irrational explanation of why, and it actually scares the homeowners or the property owners. For what reason, right? Because, like, all you're doing is you're using fear in that case, which is going to promote the haunting even more. We just talked about the psychological effects of this. I mean, I like to call it an industry with the paranormal investigation, because at this point, it's kind of what it is, right? That's what a lot of us are doing. And that's just, that's a tough thing to do. It's something we don't want to do. We don't want to mislead people. We don't want to promote fear, because that's going to promote the haunting in ways that we don't want it to truly manifest.
And there's the tail.
It's going to show up.
It was gone. Oh,
going to show up eventually. I tried. He jumped up here like mid-show, and I immediately grabbed him and pushed his tail down. I was like, "No, you're not getting in the way." But I couldn't catch him here.
Well, and I'm glad he brought up, maybe we're bringing stuff in with us too, because we know, or going by what the clients have told us, we're going in there thinking there is activity, there's a ghost there. So it kind of reinforces for me, and maybe for you too, to do a cleansing on yourself and rid yourself of anything as best you can anyways, before you go in to do an investigation, because I've never even thought that in the least that I'm bringing something into
right. I mean, you figure Catholic priests, they take the time to pray and to submit to the Lord, to become cleansed before walking in to do an exorcism. We see the same thing through a number of different Christians throughout the various denominations that do the same thing. And you're right. So often we walk out of a investigation, off of a quote unquote haunted property, and our first thing is, whoever's here, whoever we were talking to, you cannot come home with me. This is personal space. You can't pass this, property line, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, we rarely, I mean, personally, like you, I've never even thought of walking into a place and saying, hey, whoever's here with me, you cannot come onto this property. Right. I mean, yes, we've done prayers, we've done light cleansings, light shielding, things like that to protect ourselves. But that's just to protect ourselves. Like it kind of blew my mind, in this conversation here tonight, because it's like we rarely go in thinking protecting the client,
right?
Or the
other than what's supposedly already there,
right? And sadly, we see a lot of investigators, especially on TV, who walk in without doing that, and then they provoke, and then they walk away without doing anything about it, and now these people are stuck with a provoked entity who's a little upset, and it's like, okay, well, now what do we do?
And I absolutely love that the past couple investigators that we've had on now, Richard and Daryl, say, well, Daryl didn't say this, but Richard said, I rarely provoke anymore. I think Daryl said he has never provoked, or maybe he said I used to.
He said he did earlier and then he stopped. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm glad everybody that's a paranormal investigator has gone through the evolution of starting out, not that you should start out that way, let me put that out there, but gone from provoking to realizing that is not doing anybody any good.
Right.
Any other final thoughts thinking about this? Or
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, we want to hear what you guys think. So make sure that you put it in the comments below. Email us, paratruthradio@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail on our website, which is paratruth.com. Or any social medias that you can find. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe wherever you listen or watch in this particular case, now that we're doing video. And check out any of the shows that are on United Public Radio Network. Again, this was a pre-recorded show for 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. Until next week, where you will find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Erik. Peace.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.